What's going on? Awesome. Wow, headphones. This is a cool thing to do. So thank you so much for coming to my talk on building apps that scale to the moon. A few notes about this talk. This is a 30-minute talk. This is a 100-level talk. I'm going to be covering a bunch of different topics, but I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on any individual topic. And this talk is targeted squarely at developers and builders. So you don't have to be a full-time software engineer to get value out of this talk, but you should be comfortable reading and writing code. Oh, and if you have a cell phone on you, and I know you all do, please take it out of your pocket, take it out of your purse, take it out of your backpack. I'm going to ask you all to text into a phone number in just a little bit to demonstrate what I'm talking about. This is an interactive presentation, so I need all of your help here. So my name is Carter Abassa. I'm a product manager here at Twilio, and I have the pleasure of serving on the developer tools team. I'm going to talk about the dev tools team in just a second, but a couple quick notes about myself. As mentioned, I do hail from the always sunny, never rainy city of Seattle. Do we have any people from Seattle here in the audience? Yes, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It never rains in Seattle. It's a total myth. I am married to my wife, Carrie, and we have two beautiful daughters, Emily on the left and Catherine on the right. And you may have wondered about the name of my talk. This is a book called You Will Go to the Moon. It was published by May and Ira Freeman in 1959. It's a children's book. And for those of you who know your US history, Apollo 11 didn't land on the moon until 1969. So this is effectively a vintage piece of children's science fiction. And I absolutely love this book. It's amazing. I've read it to my children 100 times. And I thought of this book as I was composing this talk, right? And the reason that I did that is because I feel that building software is a journey, right? You've got this amazing place that you want to end up at, and the only question is, how do you get there? This is a picture of one of my favorite Twilio apps. It's called Peach. Peach is a startup based in Seattle, and they had this idea about what if you could send a notification to people every day, Monday through Friday, telling them about what the special lunch deal of the day was. And what if you could include a picture of that delicious meal? And what if someone could literally just reply with the word yes, and that meal could be delivered to their office? This was the idea that the Peach founders had, and they realized it, and they brought it to life. And I love Peach, and I use it all the time. And when I talk to developers about building these kinds of applications, these kinds of experiences, the next thing we talk about is how they do it. And this is where we get into some kind of gnarly technical stuff. This is actually like a vastly oversimplified technical diagram of what a typical Twilio application looks like, but it's reasonable. It's worth talking about. So you have Twilio in the middle, and then you have the global telecommunications network on the left, which ultimately is responsible for delivering text messages and phone calls to handsets. On the right, you have your software, whether your software lives on a secure server or whether your software is loaded on iPhones or Android devices. Either way, whether your software is on the server or on a device, it's going to communicate with Twilio over the public internet. And that brings me to the developer tools team. So this is a relatively new team here at Twilio. We created this team about 18 months ago. And the reason we created this team is that we were getting very consistent feedback from developers that it was just too hard to build Twilio apps, or it was harder than they thought it was going to be, right? You see these fantastic demos, and you're like, oh, that should be easy. But we talked to developers, and they were like, look, this is just too hard. And as we got feedback from developers, and we talked to them, and we tried to better understand what the issues were, we realized that a lot of these issues were boiling down to pitfalls and challenges on their journey of building software. So what's the first thing that an engineer wants to do after they have an idea? Well, they probably want to prototype that idea. Like, what's the point of a prototype? Well, the point of a prototype is that you want to easily and cheaply and quickly validate your idea. You absolutely do not want to spend the next 3 months building the wrong product, right? And developers were telling us that it was harder than they thought it should be to prototype on top of Twilio. Once you've built your prototype and you actually have decided that you're going to go build it, you got to go build it, right? And once again, developers were telling us, hey, this feels harder than it should be. Like, we're running into all these things that maybe aren't documented well or that we didn't expect, and it's slowing us down. And then, because human beings are not perfect, none of us are perfect, you're going to ship a bug to production. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. And developers were telling us that these bugs were cropping up in production, their end users were telling them about the bugs, and they didn't understand what tools were at their disposal to rapidly identify these bugs, troubleshoot them, fix them, and ship the betterment. So this is the genesis of the DevTools team. These are exactly the kinds of challenges that we've been tackling over the last 18 months. So rather than talk about all of this stuff in the abstract, what I want to do is I actually want to build a Twilio app right now with all of you live on stage. And anyone in the audience who knows me knows that any Twilio app idea that I would come up with would inevitably relate to animated GIFs, because animated GIFs rule my life in a very unhealthy way. And what I want to do is I want to build an animated GIF search engine. I want all of you to be able to send a text message to my Twilio number with some kind of search query, and I want to send back the animated GIF of your choice. So what did I say? Well, that's my idea. I think it's a great idea. I'm pretty confident in my idea, but I want to build a prototype first. I want to validate this idea. So what tools do I have at my disposal to validate these ideas? Well, there are 3 that I'd like to talk to you about very briefly. The first one is the API Explorer. This is one of the first products that the DevTools team worked on. The API Explorer is a web-based tool that you can use to make real, authenticated REST API requests to Twilio using a web interface. All you do is select the Twilio product that you're interested in. You see a list of the endpoints for that product. You select the endpoint. You enter some optional or required parameters, and you click Make Request. And it makes a real REST API request to Twilio, and it sends back the response. Maybe a successful response, maybe an unsuccessful response, but either way, you'll get the response back. This is a perfect tool to sort of prototype what it's like to work with the REST API. The next tool, testing tools. Twilio SDKs require you to create things called access tokens, because your SDK code runs in untrusted environments, like an iPhone or in JavaScript in the browser. So access tokens grant temporary permissions to these SDKs to do things with Twilio. Now, normally, in a production application, you have to set up a web server, and then the web server actually mints these tokens and sends them to the SDK. But if you're prototyping, that's a pain in the butt. So the video team actually built a web-based tool that you can use to mint temporary access tokens. And then you just copy and paste the access token into your video app that you're building, and it's a perfect tool for prototyping with video. And then the last tool I want to talk to you about is Twiml. So voice and SMS developers are in the same boat. Both of those products require you to set up a web server so that you can generate something called Twiml. Twiml is how you tell Twilio what to do. But if you're just trying to prototype an idea, you don't want to spin up a web server. So Twiml is the perfect solution. You simply tell Twilio what the Twiml is, and then you can wire that Twiml up directly to your phone number. So as I mentioned, I want to build an SMS application. So I think Twiml is the best tool to use. So I'm going to go ahead and switch over to my browser. And we are now in the Twilio runtime section of the console. And pretty much all the tools I'm talking about today you can find in the Twilio runtime. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Twiml, and I'm going to create a new Twiml. So let's go ahead and give it a name that I'll remember, GIF search. And the idea is, and make sure you have your phones out, and I'm going to make this a little bit bigger for you. You are going to send me an SMS, and I am going to send you a response. That response is going to be a message. Inside of that message is going to be a piece of multimedia. So I'm going to use the media tag. And now the last thing I need to do is just give it the URL. So a gentleman by the name of John Lindquist built this awesome animated GIF search web service. And I'll talk more about it in a second. But I'm just going to go ahead and copy this URL, and I'm going to paste it into my Twiml. And Twiml is telling me that this is valid messaging Twiml. So I'm good to go. I'm going to go ahead and click Create. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to wire this Twiml up to my phone number. It's really easy to do. I'm just going to edit my phone number, go down to the messaging section, and then when a message comes in, instead of a webhook, I'm going to use Twiml, and I'm just going to select my Twiml, and I'm going to click Save. So now, of course, the moment of truth if you could please send a text message to the number that you see on the screen. I'm going to go ahead and play along. It doesn't matter what you text in right now. You are all going to get back the same animated GIF. And that's OK. It's a prototype. I'm just trying to prove, A, that this even works, and that you all think it's cool. So go ahead and send those texts in. If you guys can, so hopefully some of you are getting your text back. By a round of applause, who thinks that this prototype was validated and I should build the app? Yes! Awesome. I will take that as a green light. So I'm going to go ahead and start building the app. Before I do that, let's talk about some of the tools that we have for building apps. And there are 3 that I'd like to talk about. The first are API keys. So if you've ever used the Twilio REST API, you're probably familiar with using an account SID and an auth token to authenticate your request. An account SID and an auth token are just like a username and a password, and they're global to your Twilio account. But API keys are better on 2 dimensions. One, you can create as many API keys as you want. So you can create different API keys for different parts of your organization. And then the second thing is, API keys are easily revocable. So if an API key ever gets compromised, you can instantly and easily revoke the API key and then create a new one and give that new API key out. So they're a much, much better solution for using the REST API. The next thing are helper libraries. So look, Twilio is just a REST API. Like, you can use any HTTP client to invoke the Twilio REST API. But Twilio decided to build helper libraries in Node and 5 other major languages. And there's an important reason that we did this. We did this, first of all, because it's easier. It's easier and it's faster, but it's also safer. If you're making manual HTTP requests, that client that you're using can't know that you've made a mistake, that you've made a typo, right? It just can't know. But the helper libraries know. The helper libraries help you write the code faster and safer. And then the last thing that I'd like to talk to you about, and this is really kind of a hidden feature that not enough people use, are fallback URLs. So right here, what's happening? This is the voice and fax section of a phone number. A call comes in. Twilio's going to webhook out to this URL that I've defined. And I know you are all A+ engineers. You would never stand up a web server that would fail. But remember, there's this public internet thing in between Twilio and your web server. There are things that are out of your control that can happen, like a DNS outage, right? So it is a best practice to set fallbacks for all of your webhooks. And in this case, I did something kind of interesting. You can use a webhook as a fallback, but I decided to actually use a TWIML as a fallback, because TWIML can't fail. Or if they do fail, there's bigger problems than your fallback, right? So make sure to set fallbacks. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and turn my prototype into an actual application. And I'm going to do this on the command line. So I've created a skeleton Node Express application. There's nothing interesting happening here. So what do I need to do to turn it into a Twilio application? Well, first, as I mentioned, I want to require the Twilio helper library. Awesome. Now, I need to create a route for this web application that I'm just going to go ahead and call /SMS. And Twilio will send requests to this, and then we will pass back responses. So what's the first thing I'm going to do? Well, I'm going to go ahead and get your search term. So when you send in a text message, Twilio makes an HTTP request to my web server. And it passes a bunch of HTTP parameters. One of those parameters is named body, and that represents whatever you texted in. So I'm going to go ahead and set that equal to term. The second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and initialize an empty TWIML response. I'm going to specifically initialize an empty TWIML messaging response. And now I just need to build the exact same TWIML that I did in my TWIML bin. TWIML, I'm going to create the message tag. I'm going to create the media tag. And now I need to give it the URL. So let's go back to my browser and grab that URL. And I'm going to paste it in here. But instead of puppy or whatever static term we might want to use, I want to use whatever you gave me. So I'm going to put in term. Awesome. And then the very last thing that I'm going to do is send the response to Twilio. So I'm going to set the content type to text XML, and I'm going to go ahead and send along the TWIML. And I think I'm done. Like any good developer, I'm going to test it before I assume it's working. The way that I'm going to test it is by just making a local curl to my web server. Say localhost 3000, SMS, and I'm going to pass body equals foo. Boom! And I am not perfect, and that's OK. That's what debugging is for. Cannot read property of message. For some reason, I hate the new keyword. This is my curse. Awesome. OK, so I fixed that bug. Let's go ahead and make the new request, and it worked. So you can see that all my TWIML is being generated exactly as I expect. So now there's one more thing I need to do, because this is local development. The server is running on my laptop. I want to use a tool called ngrok to take my local web server and put it on the public internet. So ngrok now gives me a publicly accessible URL that I can paste into Twilio. So instead of using my TWIML bin, I'm going to use a webhook. And as I mentioned, if anything goes wrong with this request to this webhook, I will fall back to the static but still very cute picture of this puppy. So I'm going to go ahead and click Save. And I hope you're used to this by now. Now, go ahead and text into that number and see what happens. So I'm going to go ahead and do my own little query. One thing we can do is go back to ngrok, and we can see all those requests coming into my web server, which is pretty cool. Let's see. So hopefully, some of you are getting your animated GIFs back, but some of you aren't, because there's a bug in this app. I did it on purpose, but it could have been an accident, right? We all make mistakes. No one's perfect. So yes, there is a bug in this app. And once again, it's not a question of if you're going to write bugs. It's simply a question of how fast you can identify them and how fast you can fix them. So what are the tools at your disposal to troubleshoot your Twilio applications? Well, you shouldn't be surprised that there are 3 of them that I'd like to share with you. The first one is the debugger. So the debugger was launched at Signal 1 year ago today. And this is a tool that my team built that gives you visibility into all of the errors and warnings that take place in your Twilio account. I'm going to go into more detail on the debugger in a second. But I want to bring your attention to another product called Voice Insights. So Voice Insights gives you visibility into call quality for your voice applications. And the last product is Messaging Insights. This gives you visibility into all of the deliverability steps for your SMS, from the moment you hit the REST API to the moment that it's delivered to the handset. All of these tools have the same thing in common. They're giving you visibility, right? Like you're a developer. Twilio sometimes feels like a black box. And we're trying to open up this black box so that you can see all of the things that are happening inside of Twilio, because we know that you need this information to troubleshoot things when they go wrong. So I made a mistake. Let's go ahead and dive into the debugger and figure out what went wrong. I may have made several mistakes. I never got my text message back. So you might notice this icon glowing in the top right. This is the debugger web notification. It's a real-time web notification that tells you that an error has occurred on your Twilio account. I can go ahead and click on this icon, and I can say, take me to the debugger. So, and then go to the debugger. You now see a list of all of the errors that have occurred in your Twilio account in reverse chronological order. And you can do some really neat stuff. Well, first of all, you can go back farther than 24 hours. You can go back as far as 30 days. What else can you do? You can actually group these by the error code. So your Twilio applications are generally going to experience all kinds of errors. But as an engineering team, you might want to know how many errors for different types of errors happen, right? So you can kind of so you can try to diagnose what exactly is going wrong with your application. You might be curious which parts of your application are having a problem. So you can also group by the webhook URL itself. And we can see that that app is terrible. I built a really broken app. I'm actually kind of fascinated about what went wrong, because this worked much better in my testing. So let's go ahead and dive in. So you can click on any individual error, and you get a lot of information. You get a link to the actual SMS SID for the text message itself. You get an error code that you can use to look up the documentation for this. But the documentation is also included inline in the debugger. We can see that this particular error is about an invalid URL format. There's documentation about what the possible causes for this error are. What are some of the possible solutions? We even have a request inspector, which gives you visibility into the entire HTTP request and the entire HTTP response from your server. And yes, semicolons do suck. I hate semicolons. And you all see the error, right? So I guess I could make it bigger, right? I didn't URL encode your search term. So I built broken URLs. That's, it's a mistake that we all make, but it's a correctable one. So why don't we go back and fix this in the app? I want you to have as successful, oh wow, Unicode. Unicode is also breaking my app. That's awesome. I'm going to fix the error that I'm aware of. I'm not sure I know how to fix the Unicode issue. But I can encode the URI component to perform better searches. So that's one fix I'm going to make. I can go over here, and I can once again try to validate that I fixed that particular bug, right? And it seems that I have, right? foo %20 bar. So I've URL encoded the search term. The app is still running, so I think you know what I'm going to ask you to do. I'm going to ask you one more time to try to make a request to this application and get back a GIF. This is purely optional, but I'm going to go ahead and send in a request. There are probably other bugs that are cropping up due to the volume of requests that we're making to this web service that John created that probably wasn't meant for these large demos. But I do want to show you one more thing, because you might be thinking to yourself, Carter, super cool that you've got this notification in the nav that tells me that an error happened, but that's not useful if I'm not sitting at my computer staring, like logged into the console, staring at your nav, right? Like, I need to know when errors occur on my production Twilio applications instantly. In fact, preferably, I'd like you to notify me programmatically. I'd like you to send me some kind of ping that says an error has happened, because then I could actually pipe that information into whatever your alerting system of choice is, whether it's PagerDuty, Nagios, Rollbar. This is super reasonable. And this is why we built the debugger webhook. Just go to Settings, and you can set a webhook for the debugger itself, which is kind of meta, because there's an original webhook that comes in, something bad happens, and then we fire another webhook, hopefully somewhere different, to tell you that an error happened. But this is an invaluable tool to use in production applications. Awesome. So look, building software is all about going on a journey, right? And depending on what you're trying to build, sometimes it seems like a really daunting journey, a really scary journey, right? I found that one thing that makes these things less daunting is to break them down into pieces, right? Like, focus on building the right thing, right? Focus on building it right. And make sure that you know how you can get notified about problems when they crop up and how you can quickly remediate them. And here at Twilio, we are endlessly dedicated to giving you the tools that you need to easily and quickly prototype Twilio applications, to easily and safely build Twilio applications, and to find out what went wrong immediately and give you all of the information that you need to fix the problem as soon as humanly possible. So once again, my name is Carter Rabasa. You can reach me at carter@twilio.com. That's not a throwaway comment. Like, I really love talking to people who are building apps on Twilio and helping them if I can. You can find me on Twitter at CRTR0. And thank you so much for being such an awesome audience.